Throughout the year, I've researched the various aspects and types of adoption to reach a better understanding of the process and the ways I can partake in something I'm passionate about. In this video, you will hear about same-sex parent adoption, transracial adoption, international adoption, U.S. starting limited adoption programs in Vietnam, and foster care. If you look at this chart, it gives various barriers to adopting a child. And I use this to show that it wasn't so black and white and that there's more to it than just wanting a child and getting one. So there was race, uninvolved fathers, teen counseling bias, foster care system, and a bunch of other things that affected it. To begin, my first topic, same-sex parent adoption, was particularly interesting given the increase in the amount of parents choosing same-sex couples to adopt their child. As reported on the 2000 census, about 65,000 children lived with same-sex parents. In 2012, 110,000 lived with same-sex parents, nearly a 100% increase. I also read that there were even more same-sex couples looking to adopt than opposite sex and unmarried couples combined. So I thought that was pretty interesting. As you can see from these statistics from lifelong adoptions, the adoption rate of same-sex couples was far greater than opposite sex, even with married and unmarried couples combined. And this refuted my original article that I used for this research, because rather than same-sex parents having difficulties adopting children, it showed they had an even greater percentage than not same-sex couples, which doesn't prove that they didn't have troubles or difficulties, but it's not impossible like the article made it seem. Intimidating. Lastly, in my research, I found that Wells Fargo was the first American bank to showcase a same-sex couples ad. I thought this ad was important because it showcased how the world was transitioning away from discrimination to acceptance. Lastly, I found this cartoon depicting an argument against same-sex parent adoption by the Fair Labor Association. And in the cartoon, the children just want a family while the FLA wants to protect family values. And I thought that in this you can really see the two different perspectives from children in the FLA, but you could definitely tell that the author sided with same-sex adoption given the way the children are helpless and just want a family while the FLA guy is big and intimidating. To get involved, I found American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLA. The ACLA works to get same-sex parents the same rights opposite-sex parents and their children get. They also help same-sex couples foster children, and another topic we'll talk about later on. Continuing, I researched transracial adoptions. I thought that states such as Virginia have a higher Caucasian adoption rate. As you can see from the census from 2006, Maryland and D.C. had a much higher African American adoption rate. Something that's important to keep in mind is that D.C. is one of the top receiving states for adoption. The total number adopted 179, Maryland 364, and Virginia 551. So it's important comparison to see out of all those numbers, the majority that were adopted. And my article also gave the view from Regina Bush, an African American who adopted 2 white girls. And originally people called it cultural genocide and called her daughter a white girl in a black girl's body. And even with this discrimination, transracial adoption has become more common, shown by this graph from 2000 to 2006. And in a podcast from Ben Douglas, he explained his interracial home was a loving, safe environment, but he still felt out of place. The editorial Should Race Be a Factor by Lola J states that in the United States, in 2010, black children left the care system at a rate of 24%, while white children left at a rate of 43%, according to the U.S. And from this graph that I found from the New York Times, it shows that transracial adoption is growing, and though this graph is from 2012, the amount of white children adopted was far greater than children of a different race. Keeping it even Asian 5%, black 1%, American Indian 1%. So while it's still getting better, there's still a lot of progress to be made. And that black child is 3 times less likely to be adopted from care than a white child. And until recently, UK guidelines on adoption have made it difficult to adopt between races. International adoption. I noticed that international adoption wasn't growing like same-sex parent adoption and transracial adoption, but instead declining. So I also found this graph from my CNN article that showed the top receiving and giving nations, I guess you could say. And over here were all the nations that gave their children up for adoption, including Colombia, Venezuela, Guatemala, China, and then it was the top 5 receiving nations, which include Italy, France, and USA being the big one. So all these new rules and bans on adoption will make it much harder for kids maybe to get the care they need that the U.S. would be willing to give international children. And international adoption is already low, and with these new bans and rules, it will just make it all the harder. Also, what's important to keep in mind is that numerous restrictions on adoptions from other countries have caused a 69% drop in U.S. adoptions from overseas since a peak in 2004, according to Times Magazine. And Russia has closed adoptions with the U.S., while China has made it even harder to adopt children. And after these new bans, kids in Chinese orphanages have grown 50%. And to help me find more information and ways I could get involved, I found Travel State.gov, and it takes you through rules and processes and gives you insight on current events dealing with the topic. There are also various petitions to sign and info about lobbying you can get involved in yourself. And what's great is you can donate, adopt, or sponsor a child, and it had a lot of information if you have questions about anything. The laws are getting stricter for international adoption. There are still ways to adopt that are definitely worth researching. So next, I decided to go a little more specific on international adoption and take a look at Vietnam's recent lift on the adoption ban with the U.S. So the reason this is important is that Vietnam has had this lift for about 6 years now, and American parents were not able to adopt any children from Vietnam, and now they will initially only be able to adopt children who are older than 5 or have disabilities or have siblings. Under the new agreement, there will only be 2 adoption agencies, Dillon International, Inc. and Holt International Children's Services, Inc., according to Times Magazine. They will be the only ones listed to operate in Vietnam. Before the ban, there were over 40 agencies operating in the country. Now that the ban has been lifted, what's left to do is hopefully open up more chances for adoption. Lastly, I researched foster care. Although it doesn't directly relate to adoption, I figured it gave a different side and view from those who don't get the opportunity to be adopted. About 400,000 children in the U.S. live in foster care, according to federal officials. And another thing that I found with foster care was on January 7th, 2015, a federal grant was awarded to Maryland Brings Greater Flexibility to Child Welfare, and it was worth $650 million over 5 years. And it's to prevent the problem that lead to children being removed from homes, which can cause a lot of trauma. I also found this really good graph that gave information about what happens to foster kids, and you see that nothing really turns out so positive, because a lot of the times most of them don't earn college degrees, they won't be employed, experience PTSD, and according to this graph from LA Times, 26,000 young adults will age out of the foster care system and be totally unprepared for what's to come. And in my research, I found pretty startling statistics, including 54% earn a high school diploma, 2% earn a bachelor's degree or higher, 84% become parents too soon, exposing their children to a repeated cycle of neglect and abuse, 51% are unemployed, 30% have no health insurance, 25% experience homelessness, 30% receive public assistance. But it does appear that extra support can make a difference. The Chicago study tracked the lives of about 700 foster children in Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And those in Illinois who were still getting foster care services at age 19 were less likely to have been arrested, 22% versus 34%, than those in the other two states who were on their own. And lastly, in my article, I found some colleges have started a program that catered towards foster care kids, including UCLA. The college will provide year-round housing, scholarships, academic and therapeutic counseling, tutoring, healthcare coverage, toiletries, campus jobs, bedding, and towels. And I also found child advocates who are trying to enact a new law that will give in-home child welfare programs easier access to foster care funds. And I thought that was really good to see. So all in all, I learned a lot about adoption and about how there's so much to it, and that it's really important that we remember that there are kids out there who aren't lucky enough